So it's my pleasure to introduce Dion. So Dion's entry into advertising came from being hired out of an internship in one of Western New York's premier branding agencies. He's now spent 25 plus years climbing the ranks of top agencies in the Buffalo and Rochester area, designing, creative directing, mentoring, and building teams. He now leads the Martin Group in the Rochester office, managing the creative product and growing the business through cultivating meaningful client relationships. With an affinity for corporate identity and branding, Dion has worked with an array of industries, including food and beverage, financial, sports, education, healthcare, and the like. Dion's career is decorated with a multitude of creative awards, including the National Addy Awards, an Outdoor Advertising Obie Award, and the Distinguished Alec Osborne Award for Creativity. He has also been published in dozens of international branding, design, and corporate identity books and publications, including Print Magazine, House Magazine, International Designs, The One Show, Graphis, and Master Library Series, and more. Dion, it's really a pleasure to be with you today. I know that we have a great session prepared. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for attending this workshop. The basic premise of this workshop is to how to overcome your brand. And I'm going to be spending probably about 25 minutes going through some of my thinking on that. But before I start, I'll just back up and give you a little bit of a background on myself. As you heard earlier, I do have quite a bit of experience in branding. I was trained as a graphic designer and art director. I'm typically the one that is responsible for the way things look in the marketing realm. And it's one of the things that I really love to do. I've led creative teams for over 20 years. So I'm not a spring chicken, as they say. I remember in the day when I used to be one of the younger ones on the creative team, but now I'm one of the more experienced ones. I currently head up the Rochester office of the Martin Group, but I'm still actively designing and shaping brands on behalf of clients. When I went to college years and years ago, what I love to do is graphic design. It's definitely still a passion of mine, and it's something that I don't ever want to stop doing. A little bit about the Martin Group and the company that I work for. We are located in New York State, and we actually have 4 offices across New York State. We were founded in 2001 in Buffalo, and in 2014 we started the Rochester office. And most recently, we opened up an Albany office and a New York City office. We are an integrated communications firm. And what that means is that anything from a marketing perspective that you might need from a company, for your company, we can handle in-house. We are experienced with regional, national, and global brands. We are often recognized for industry excellence. And we have vast experience with many companies across many different disciplines in brand development. So we're all here together, gathered today to talk about how to overcome your brand. There's 4 main rules that I wanted to discuss that can help you do that. First is I think it's important to overcome your brand that you understand what brand is and what it isn't. You need to know what your brand promises. Know your audiences and how they digest media. And then also to make an emotional connection with those audiences. So I think it's good to acknowledge that branding is one of the most misunderstood areas of marketing. So many people talk about branding. Many people have different perspectives. So why don't we start off by saying what some prominent people do say about brand. Walter Landor says that products are made in factories, but brands are created in the mind. Steve Forbes says your brand is the single most important investment you can make in your business. Philip Coulter says the art of marketing is the art of brand building. If you are not a brand, you are a commodity. Then price is everything, and the low-cost producer is the winner. So to best understand what brand is, why don't we look at what brand is not? A brand is not a logo or tagline. These are company signatures. A brand is not advertising. Ads are only deliverers of your message. A brand is not a website. Websites are online addresses. And a brand is not a product. A brand is so much more than a product. What is a brand? A brand is an emotional experience. It's a mindset. It's an opinion informed by everything that makes an impression. So your logo, your tagline, print ads, billboards, how easy your website is to navigate, TV spots, videos, digital ads, search results, your color palette, office interior, customer care, social content, customer reviews, your address, the way your employees dress, the quality of your candidates, how fast you pay your bills, the way your receptionist answers the phone, or honestly, even if you have a receptionist. Collectively, everything that makes an impression makes your brand. All impressions inform your brand. Some impressions are in your control, and some of them aren't. So what I'm here to say is invest in those impressions that you can control. I want to back up a little bit and talk about my son as it relates to branding. When he was probably around 12, 13 years old, there was only a couple articles of clothing or brands of clothing that he would wear. And the brands of choice that he loved was Under Armour and Nike. If we came home with a sweatshirt that looked identical to one of the Under Armour sweatshirts, but it had a different logo, it had an Adidas logo or something on it, he wouldn't wear it. Literally, everything from his shoes to his sweatshirt to the caps on his head was Nike or Under Armour. It kind of dawned on me why. Why was it just those two brands? Obviously, a lot of these other brands, whether it's Adidas or Pumas or Converse, Reebok, you name it, they make very, very similar products, often seeming very identical. But for him, it was Nike and Under Armour were the brands that he chose to wear. What I realized is that he connected emotionally to these brands. The brand was part of his own self-expression. And ultimately, brand determined what we bought for him. For him, if he wore that sweatshirt and he wore that sweatshirt into school, it was a reflection of who he was as a person. If he wore the Nike basketball sweatshirt, then people knew that he loved basketball. I think in his mind, if he wore those brands, then it might have made him feel a little bit more popular. It might have made him feel a little bit better about himself. And I don't think it's really that different for us. The cars we drive, where we choose to get coffee, the labels we wear, we choose based on brand. It's important to understand that brand isn't about uniqueness. Let's take example from some of these companies. What's unique about BMW or Starbucks, Coca-Cola, or Target? Ultimately, essentially, very little is different or unique about these companies. It's all about how they choose to brand. BMW, for example, the ultimate driving machine, brands itself differently than its competitor Mercedes. Mercedes is much more about elegance, sophistication, and luxury. Starbucks, for example, brands itself very differently than Dunkin' Donuts. or now referred to Dunkin'. Starbucks is a gathering place where people can come and meet after work or before work. Dunkin', on the other hand, is you go there and get your coffee to go. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, again, they brand themselves very differently. Target versus Walmart. Target is kind of the chic department store, where Walmart, it's all about value. Simply said, they brand themselves differently. Brand is about what you choose to own. Not always logical. When you're talking about emotions and connecting emotionally, a lot of times that logical decision isn't the reason that you would choose a brand. It's much more than that. It's an emotional decision. In the case of my son, and I think in the case with all of us, it's about what you connect with emotionally. The holy grail of brand is, if you buy my brand, if you use my brand, if you experience my brand, I promise. Ultimately, a brand is a promise. What are you promising your audience about your company? Let's take a look at some well-known companies and come to some kind of realization about what they actually promise. For example, McDonald's, what do they promise? They promise value. Volvo, they promise safety. Rolex promises luxury. And Coca-Cola, you would think that Coca-Cola might promise refreshment or something of that nature. But in essence, Coca-Cola promises happiness. Apple promises simplicity. Think about Apple. All of their products are very, very simple and easy to use. Their packaging, compared to some of its competitors, very simple. A lot of clean, negative white space. So right down from their product to their packaging, they're reinforcing their brand promise of simplicity. Starbucks, we mentioned a little earlier, they promise the third place. If you're not at work and if you're not at home, then you can meet at Starbucks. FedEx promises reliability. And Nike promises authentic athletic performance. A question that I have is, what does your brand promise? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about, your audience and what is being promised out by all of your communication and all of your impressions? And importantly to understand is, who are you promising it to? Do you know your audience? Let's take a look at Nike. I think it's a good example of a brand that we're all familiar with. Nike has many audiences, whether it's the weekend athlete, professionals, men, women, kids, baseball players, golfers, swimmers, soccer players, track athletes, or couch potatoes like myself, or even basketball players like my son. They have many different audiences, and they reach all of those audiences with their brand promise. And it's one promise. It's authentic athletic performance. So it doesn't matter if you're necessarily a weekend athlete or a child or a baseball player or a basketball player or someone like myself that needs to exercise more. Nike promises the same promise to everyone. And that, in essence, is, if you have a body, you are an athlete. If you wear their apparel, it makes you feel athletic. So it's important to understand that you can promise the same thing to different audiences for years and never be repetitive. Let's look at Coca-Cola, for example. Obviously, one of their most famous advertising campaigns was "I'd like to buy the world a Coke." Was it promising refreshment? Was it talking about the beverage itself and how delicious it was? No, it was promising something more. It was promising happiness. And if you reflect to all of their advertising, I think from there you can understand that whether it's the polar bears at the holiday time or even interesting more product promotions where you can find a bottle of Coke with names on it, they're connecting with people and trying to make people happy. If you think of the Mean Joe Green television spot, probably one of their most famous television spots, that or even Santa Claus around the holidays holding a glass of Coca-Cola. All of these things are promising happiness. It all goes back to their brand promise. So a brand promise is all about delivering a consistent consumer experience no matter who the audience is. You promise the same thing to all of your audiences across all platforms, wherever your audience digests media. So a question for you is, do you know who your audience is? And what media is best to reach them? Television ads, for example. Less people are watching traditional programming. I think we all realize that with the streaming services and the apps now and the smart TVs that people can purchase. But television ads are still one of the most powerful tools for general brand awareness. Banner ads on websites, they're small, often intrusive, and many times actually overlooked. But they're trackable and can drive to a landing page that can deliver a great customer experience. Billboards. With the pandemic, less people are driving and actually seeing the outdoor boards. But it remains one of the most effective ways to reach the masses. Newspaper ads. Readership is down and less people are getting their news from print. More people are getting their news from websites or online sources. But interestingly enough, audiences find newspaper ads to be one of the most trusted formats. If they see an ad in a newspaper, they're more often they believe it. They believe the promises that are made. Magazine ads, there are fewer and fewer in production. However, they can be very targeted to specific type of readers. And they also have a very long shelf life, unlike a banner ad that people will look at and it exists for 5 seconds. Magazines could actually be on shelf or on someone's coffee table for many, many months. Social media. It seems that everyone wants to be involved in social media and, have their brand out there from a social perspective. But what we've discovered is that it's a very crowded space, and it takes a lot of effort to do it really, really well. The plus side is that it's completely targeted to specific audiences and is very reportable. You can get analytics based on who's looking at your ads, when are they looking at them, what are the impressions that they're making. So there are pros and cons to all mediums, but finding the right mix is critical to change perceptions. One thing that's important to understand is to change your audience's mind might require you to make some changes about who your audience is, what you're promising, how to reach them, and how to be effective with your messaging. What I would suggest is that you need to meet your audience where they are, connect with them emotionally, and make your brand resonate and make it memorable in all the right ways. One thing to ask yourself is, why should someone choose you over your competition? And I would implore you to give them a reason to engage with your brand and your company. In the next little bit of time, I just wanted to share with you an example of of a client that we actually worked on at the Martin Group, and it is a staffing company. They didn't have a large national budget. They are a very local company. But we went through our exercise to help identify what their look, what their feel should be. And we based it on strategy and we based it on research. So the first thing that we did for them is we did some brand research. And that involved doing internal and external in-depth interviews. We did a brief competitive analysis. We looked a little bit about their differentiation. We looked at their audiences and their audience profile. We developed their brand personality. Brand personality is simply if you can imagine your brand as a person, what characteristics would they have? Are they warm and friendly? Are they sophisticated and smart? It's identifying those brand qualities and attributing them to your company. And then ultimately, we developed their brand promise. From all of that, we looked at media, and the media department made determinations on how to best reach those audiences and reach them in a way that they digested media. We developed creative materials, ads, logos, taglines, business cards, all of that helped bring their new brand to life. And ultimately, there was implementation involved where we actually executed all of those ideas and put some of the ads into marketplace. So I'll share with you some of the creative examples that we did for Imagine Staffing. And you'll see the logo, the tagline, how the website looked. Understand that it was a very limited creative campaign. There wasn't a lot of money involved in this. There wasn't a lot of tactics. It was very targeted and very specific through different mediums to the audiences that we felt could best digest the content that we were delivering. One thing I think is important to note is that their brand promise that we helped develop was really rotated around partnership. So the first creative example I wanted to share is their actual identity, their logo. And if you remember early on, I said the brand is not the logo, the brand is not the tagline. However, the logo itself is part of those things that leave an impression. So it is part of the brand. So when we have a brand promise of partnership, we want to take every aspect that we can, every control, every impression that we can make, even with the logo, to re-emphasize what that brand promise is. So Imagine Staffing, I think one of the great things about Imagine Staffing is their name is very distinctive. I think it's very memorable. It's very promising and upbeat because of the name actually Imagine. But I think one of the other things that's interesting that we wanted to have in this logo that can make it ownable to them was to actually make use of the letter I that comes from their name. So if you look at this logo, it is actually two lowercase i's coming together, and it looks like people actually shaking hands. So we're owning the I of their name, we're owning the brand promise of partnership, and we're actually delivering this visually through the logo itself by showing this partnership between these two people shaking hands. Their tagline that we developed was "From hire to hire." We played that out in a number of different creative elements, but what I think is important to understand is if you come to Imagine Staffing for business, we can not only take you as an individual or you as a company to a higher place, but our candidates, we can take them from where they are now to a higher place. So there's very multidisciplinary, factions of ways to pay off that from higher to higher tagline. The conceptual approach we took is is here, and that is imagine staffing brings a human side to the sometimes impersonal business of business recruiting. So does this concept by exploring one of the questions we start asking from the time we are small. What do you want to be when you grow up? And then imagining all the possibilities. So this campaign that we developed them is emotional. It's literally using kids and that idea of what they want to be when they grow up in a space where no one else was doing something like that. So the campaign was very distinctive, it was very ownable, and it was very memorable. So here's an example of how that campaign translated to the website. So it's very visually driven. We've got kids that are engaging in fun kind of activities, and I think you can imagine this little girl. Maybe she's imagining herself being an astronaut someday. But the headline reads, "She always imagined looking down at the glass ceiling." So through Imagine Staffing, anybody that has any kind of ambition about a career advancement, Imagine Staffing is a place that sets that bar high and is able to help people achieve their goals. Here it is, the way it could translate on a tablet or even on a phone, with, again, very emotional headlines. He always imagined blazing a trail rather than following the herd, or he imagined making a difference more than making a living. Some of this creative was actually very targeted. This is an example of in an airport. It's a wall mural in an airport that contained all that same messaging. It was a very large display, probably over 8 foot tall. So when people would come into the airport, and again, very targeted, because we were thinking that people that are traveling, business owners, might be able to use Imagine Staffing. People for work that would be traveling through the airport could also be the ones that are looking for that next level in their career. Some more airport signage. Imagine unmatched experience and unquenchable enthusiasm. Imagine Staffing from hire to hire. Some more airport signage. Imagine making a difference as much as making a living. And some print executions. 2 different print executions in some magazines locally that had high readership over professional. Just imagine. From the time we're kids, we define our future by what we're going to be. Doctor, fireman, astronaut. To make it happen takes vision of what's possible, but it also takes something more. Something intangible. Your next staffing decision can elevate your organization to the next level. Imagine Staffing is your partner every step of the way, finding people who set their sights high and back it up with a record of success. Because one without the other is just dreaming. So again, this whole campaign was intended to connect emotionally with professionals, business owners, to make them remember Imagine Staffing, to keep Imagine Staffing top of mind. But also the campaign reinforced their brand promise of partnership. So to back up from the very, very beginning, how do you overcome your brand? I mentioned 4 distinct points. One is understanding what brand is and what brand isn't. And I think some of the examples I shared earlier can help define that. A brand isn't just your logo. It isn't just your tagline. It isn't even your advertising. A brand is something that is a collective of all the impressions that people talk about your company, all the things that people would see about your company. One thing that's important to understand is that your brand promises something to its audiences. It promises something to everyone that is viewing your brand. So the question is, do you know what your brand is promising? Have you taken a step back and actually asked yourself that, or work with an agency to help define that? Once you do determine what your brand promises, then it's a heck of a lot easier for you to make sure that your ad campaign, the way your employees are treating customers, your website, all of the things that you can control that leave impressions, driving them down that same funnel to make sure that they're all promising the same thing. And it's important to understand that you promise the same thing to all audiences. Um, whether it is someone that you're hiring, whether it's someone that's cleaning your office, whether it's vendors that you pay, you're promising them the same thing. And it's also important to understand if you are going to be reaching new audiences, where do they digest their media? We mentioned earlier about commodities. And if you are not a brand, you're a commodity. I would certainly hope, unless you're in that phase of your company where you are the lower price point organization where everyone will choose you because of your price. Most companies are not like that. I think most companies want to distinguish themselves in an important way from its competition. And one way to do that is to strike that emotional accord with audiences. Help them keep your brand top of mind. If they have a need, let them think about you first. I think you're more apt to be a more engaging brand if you know how to connect emotionally with your audience. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And from there, we can open it up to any kind of questions, and I will do my best to answer it.
Dion, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I know for me as a marketing professional, branding is one of the most mysterious parts of marketing, how to establish it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. So just demystifying that a bit is great. So we have a couple of questions from the audience, but the first one I wanted to ask is I'm personally attached to. So I just want to talk about, so we gave a couple examples of different forms of branding, Nike and Starbucks. So I was wondering if you could speak to Salesforce's branding. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Salesforce is doing something really different. Most tech industries, they brand themselves as kind of chic and cool, and they have little cartoon people with their icons. What Salesforce does is they have these kind of 3D creations in animal suits, and they have like their trailblazer branding. So essentially, it's just a really different move in the industry, what Salesforce has done, but Salesforce is wildly successful. So I'm just wondering if you can speak a bit about that phenomenon.
I can say that I'm not that familiar with it, but based on what you said, and I think if you compare what you said to the presentation I gave, what they're doing is they're trying to be distinctive. They're trying to set themselves apart. And I would bet that their product offering isn't really that different from a lot of its other competitors, but they are successful because I think they probably do take risks. They are different from the standpoint that they want to make their advertising a little bit more unique to keep audiences going back to them and keep themselves.
I loved your example of Imagine staffing. So I guess I was also, we had one question about the different forms of media. So even though social media is a very overcrowded space, that's probably the number one way that staffing firms market to candidates and clients, especially via LinkedIn. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about how specifically to find candidates in your area and establish a brand like via social media that can draw candidates to you.
That's a very, very good question, and I think a lot of clients face that same struggle. I think a lot of clients that we deal with, they think that if they have a Facebook page or if they have a LinkedIn page and they post things on those services a couple times a month, that the people will come. But I think to do it really successfully, it takes more effort. It's boosting post. It's knowing what you're saying, finding content that's relevant. There's not an exact science to social media, but I do think it is a very, very powerful tool. But I think many companies are finding to do it correctly just takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. So I think to approach it from a more of a strategic standpoint, to have goals in mind, to continually analyze the data, analyze what's working, what's not working, will help people be more successful in that space.
Great. Yeah, I know that that's a real challenge for people, just like getting it right. So the next question harkens back to when you were talking about your son and his own personal branding. So lots of leaders in the staffing industry try to create their own personal brand, which in turn drives business to their company brand. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the benefits of building a personal brand and how to do that effectively. And on the other side, if building a personal brand might actually be an inhibitor to acquiring more business. For example, if your personal brand kind of turns someone off, like how do you make sure that you avoid that? Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No, I think it makes sense, and I think what's interesting is that I think all of us have our own personal brand, right? The way we dress says a lot about ourselves. The way we talk says a lot about us. The cars that we drive, the houses that we live in. If we're kind to people, if we're, confident, if we're insecure, I think all of those things kind of make an impression about who we are as people. So if company leaders are, defining who their personal brand is, and televising that, so to speak, or advertising that, if the audience receives that in a positive way, for example, if a company owner's personal brand is that he's intelligent and he's confident and he's a go-getter, people that want that in a leader are going to be gravitated to that. If that is in line with the business promises, I think that's great. However, I think it could be of a disservice if the person's the person's personal brand, the leader's personal brand, is in conflict with what the company is promising. Then I think there's two things that are fighting against each other.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So just one more question here because I want to make sure we end on time and let people go to their next sessions. But how do you create an impression on your audience? And how do you think marketing plays a role in this branding? So like, what are just some tips on creating that impression and that emotional resonance?
Well, I think, and it goes back to this presentation, I think it's knowing your audience, knowing where they digest media, and really getting a sense of who they are as individuals. But then on the flip side, understanding who you are. I think it's always fascinating when we go through these brand workshops and understanding what companies' brand personalities are. If you would imagine your brand as a person, what qualities and characteristics do they have? Are they kind? Are they warm? Are they friendly? If you actually look at them as a person, I always find it interesting then to create for that brand. Like you are creating a brand that has those characteristics so it can reach that audience in that same way as if a person was connecting with another person. The goal, my personal goal through brand, is to connect emotionally with someone. And if you're thinking about your brand as a person and all the emotional characteristics of them, it makes it a lot easier to reach that audience in the same way.
Great. Well, Dion, thank you so much. To all of our attendees, thank you for coming. Martin Group, I know, does wonderful stuff. They've been recommended to me highly by many colleagues in the industry. I encourage you to check them out. Dion, thank you so much for your presentation. It was great seeing about Imagine Hire and everything else. Again, this recording will be available on demand through the CPAL website. So once again, thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.